I call your attention to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. This is the gospel lesson in the lectionary this Sunday. There are a lot of preachers who are preaching from this text. Luke chapter 16, beginning with the 19th verse. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, that's the word that's used, in Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with the Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, "Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire." But Abraham replied, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us." He answered, "Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them so that they will not also come to this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them." "No, Father Abraham," he said, "but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent." He said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." Let us pray. God above us, God before us, God within us, O Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, be now a bridge between us across which your truth can move. We pray this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. "You didn't even notice me." That's the voice that was shouted at us. I really didn't know where it was coming from. You see, several decades ago, I was in New York City with what was then my best friend, my late best friend, Eddie Hutchins. And we were attending a church service. This was around mid-December. And I remember it snowing that night. We were at a church service, and it was a very festive service. They sang lots of Christmas carols. The children were smiling. Their parents were smiling. We all were smiling. It was such a wonderful service that put us all in the Christmas mood. And after the service, Hutch and I went to the subway to go to another part of the city. It was dark, and while we were walking along, we saw a pile of trash right in the center of the sidewalk. And so we walked around it, we stepped around it, and we were talking about how wonderful that church service was. And that's when it happened. A voice from somewhere said, "You didn't even notice me." We turned around wondering if the voice was speaking to us. All of a sudden, that pile of trash began to rustle and began to move. And we realized it wasn't a pile of trash at all. It was a person. It was a homeless man, one of many in that city. He was wearing dark clothes and he was wrapped in a dark blanket, and pinned to his blanket was a sign that simply said, "Hungry." We had walked past him, not really paying attention. Maybe we chose not to notice. You know, there are many homeless people on the streets of New York City as well as Boston. How can we help all of them? It can be an overwhelming feeling. Did we notice them? Did I care? Was I focused on the beautiful things of that Christmas service, you know, that lovely service within the confines of a beautiful stained glass edifice? I had not noticed. Well, in Luke's gospel today, we have the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. And this passage offers many opportunities for prayer and for preaching. But now, as we ponder this story, I want to be clear about three things. First of all, this is not a parable that's to be used to tell all the poor people of the world that they should be happy with their lot because one day it's guaranteed that they'll have a place in heaven. Yes, at one point in the reading, Abraham says to Lazarus, he says that Lazarus is being rewarded because he has suffered much on earth. But I think it's very unfortunate that some preachers across the century have misused this text to tell the world's poor people that God wants them to stay that way so that they can go to heaven later. Frankly, I just think that's a terrible interpretation. You see, I believe that Jesus came to alleviate suffering, not to encourage it. This is not a passage to justify the suffering of the poor at the hands of the rich. Number two, this is not a parable that guarantees that every rich person will suffer in the netherworld. If that's true, then we all should be packing for our meeting with Satan, because the truth of the matter is, when compared to every human who has ever lived anywhere on the face of this earth, most of us would be the rich. Even those of us who live rather modest lives, when compared to every human of every century, everywhere, I tell you what, we live in abundance. There is a passage where Jesus said that it is hard, it is difficult for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. But he also proclaims that salvation comes to many of the rich people, including that there's some who are included in our gospel. Wealth in and of itself does not buy a one-way ticket to down there. No, that's not a good interpretation either. And then third, let me mention that this is not a documentary on heaven and hell. Actually, neither one of those words are even used in this passage. It's Abraham's side, Abraham's bosom, and Hades, which was equivalent to the Old Testament Sheol. This is not a passage about the final judgment. The man who was being agonized had brothers who were living then, and at most it would be something about an intermediary state. But this is not a passage that is describing the furniture of heaven or the temperature of hell. Let me quote even an extremely conservative pastor and apologist, Robert Morey, in his book Death and the Afterlife. Robert Morey says that this story, Jesus borrowed this story from a common rabbinical tale of the day. It doesn't provide us with a preview of the world to come. As a matter of fact, the German scholar Hugo Gressman says that there are at least 7 versions of this story in Jewish literature. One of the most famous was about a poor student of the law and a wealthy tax collector by the name of Bar Mayan. This was a recurring motif in literature of that day, the reversal of fortunes, the reversal of earthly fortunes. Jesus seems to talk a lot about that reversal of fortunes. He talks about the first being last, the last will be first. He talks about the humble being exalted, the exalted being humbled. Turned around, the reversal of fortunes in the hereafter. And of course you can read through the Beatitudes and he says the same thing in Luke's version of it. Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. All right, having gotten all of that out of the way, what does this story tell us? It most definitely is about the reversal of fortunes. The rich man suffers, the poor man is comforted. Why does the rich man suffer in this story? Is it because he was an arrogant man? Perhaps. You know, it seems to me like this fella felt entitled to have other people serve him. I mean, did you notice he begins immediately with giving directions to Abraham and Lazarus? He wants Lazarus to dip his finger so he can get a drop of water. He wants Lazarus to deliver a message. He wants Lazarus to get to work. He tells Abraham what message to send and what messengers are needed. In effect, he's telling Abraham how to do his job. It sounds like the rich man was accustomed to giving orders to having people do what he wanted them to do. Perhaps he felt entitled to be taken care of. He believed that he deserved whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. Now, thank God, none of us would fall into that trap, right? We would never teach our children that kind of entitled attitude, would we? Do we? Let me suggest why I think that how things turned out the way they did for this rich man in this story. His sin was not that he was rich. I think his sin was he just didn't notice. He just didn't notice. Lazarus was lying at the entrance to this rich man's palace, and Lazarus must have gone there most days. This poor man had some idea of what the rich man was eating. He desired to get the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. And Jesus even gives us that grotesque detail that the dogs even came and licked the poor man's sores. The poor man, his belly groaning with hunger pains, covered with sores, was at the rich man's door. The rich man would have walked by him frequently. The rich man was dressed in purple and fine linens. Perhaps he was focused on, the pretty things that he was wearing and about all the rich food that he was about to eat, that he just walked by this poor man. He just walked over him, perhaps. Maybe he just didn't notice. Now, you know what? It's easy for us to pass judgment on this rich man. We say to ourselves, well, if I had some beggar, lying at my door, like this man in the story, I would certainly notice and I would certainly help him out. We might get mad at him. We might even call the police to have him removed. But at least we would notice him, right? But do we notice? That's the question. Do we see the burdens that our neighbors are carrying? Do we want to see what others are dealing with? Do we? It can be a frightening proposition because we may get this gut level sense that we're going to feel overwhelmed. There's so many people in need of help that there's nothing I can do. I've always loved that story about the little boy who was one day on the shore picking up starfish in the sand and throwing them back into the ocean. One by one, he'd pick up a starfish and pitch him into the water. There was an elderly man who was walking along the shore, and he noticed what the boy was doing, and he walked up to him and he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, the sun is up and the tide's going out, and if I don't get these starfish into the water, they're going to die." And the elderly man said, son, let's look around here. There are hundreds of starfish. You couldn't possibly make a difference." With that, the young man just reached over and picked up a starfish, threw him into the water, and he said, "I made a difference for that one." Perhaps we walk by the heap of garbage after church talking about lovely stuff. Maybe we just need to pay more attention, and we need to notice neediness. Maybe we need to start seeing, noticing the burdens of our brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ, the burdens they are carrying. Maybe we need to notice what it's like to live in crushing poverty in this economy. Maybe we need to notice that mother who doesn't know how she's going to feed her children next week. Maybe we need to notice that person who lives in a tent under a bridge, no running water. Or that person who's having to live in a trailer because his home has been flooded. Maybe we need to notice an alien, whether they are legal or illegal in this country or any other country. Maybe we need to notice. Maybe we need to notice that woman who lives daily in the fear of her husband abusing her and their children. Maybe we need to notice that adult who lives with the terrible effects of childhood abuse. Maybe we need to notice the hungry and the hopeless. You know, I don't know if you know this name, old Will Campbell. Boy, what a great preacher he was. A mountaineer from Tennessee, a Baptist preacher who was extremely involved in the civil rights movement back in the Jim Crow era. Will Campbell was on a book tour. He had written a dozen books, some award-winning books. I don't know if you've ever read A Brother to a Dragonfly. You ought to look that book up and read it. It's an autobiographical book. But Will Campbell was going to several big cities, and he would ask around. He would say, well, how many homeless people are roaming the streets in this city? And you know what he discovered? He discovered that the number of homeless people in the cities was pretty much the same as the number of churches and synagogues and mosques in the city. And so then he concluded that if every congregation would just take on one person who's homeless, give them some lodging, give them some food, find them a job, give them some hope, then we could eliminate homelessness in the cities. It's doable. It's doable when you look at it from that perspective. Then somebody says, well, Will, how would we afford it? He said, the same way you afford your steeples and your rich church edifices with tithes and offerings. Look, I can't tell you what Jesus wants you to do with this message, this week or this coming month. Can't even tell you what Jesus wants our church to do in this coming week or this coming month. But this much I know. In this section of Luke, Jesus gives us little wiggle room. There is somebody covered with a dark blanket on the sidewalk of your life, needing help. Will you notice? And will you help? There is somebody lying at the door of your life, hungry and in great need. Will you notice? And will you do something about it? Will we let Jesus open our eyes today? And will we allow ourselves to notice? Well, amen.